Welcome to the world of Dreamside Traveler. Here, beneath the soothing sound of gentle rain, we journey through time and space, uncovering the mysteries of the past and diving into the most captivating pages of human history. This place is created for those who love exploring the world in the quiet of evening, for those who value peace while yearning to discover something new before sleep. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please give this video a like. It helps other people find our stories. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers in our club of nighttime history lovers. And the Dreamside Traveler channel will become your faithful guide to sleep. We're constantly adding new stories for your peaceful evenings. And if you have ideas about which historical topics interest you, or simply want to share your thoughts, leave comments below the video. I'm genuinely curious to know what inspires you. Now close your eyes. Feel this gentle rain outside your window. Allow yourself to relax. Our journey begins right now. The night air over Rome felt thick with incense and laughter. Torches burned along the marble walkways of the Palatine Hill, their flames licking at the darkness like hungry spirits. Down one long colonnade, soft music flowed from lyres and flutes, weaving with the rustle of silk and the clink of bronze cups. Patrician women, draped in translucent gowns, reclined on purple cushions beside senators who poured dark wine as if it were water. Exotic dancers from distant provinces moved between couches, balancing bronze lamps on their heads while their ankles chimed with tiny bells. The perfume of spiced myrrh mingled with the musky scent of sweat and desire, painting the scene in an almost dreamy haze. Yet at the edge of this haze, a stern figure stood alone. His name was Gaius Musonius Rufus, a stoic philosopher whose reputation for moral strictness rivaled even that of Cato the Younger. Musonius had been invited to the gathering by a young senator who admired his teachings that praised self-control and condemned luxury. Tonight, that senator hoped to demonstrate that one could taste Rome's finest pleasures without losing himself completely. Musonius watched as a servant ladled honey-sweetened wine into an already overflowing cup. He watched as a girl barely older than 16 raised her arms to dance for a man thrice her age. He watched as the crowd shifted closer, heat rising with the rising laughter, and he felt a tightening in his chest, an ache born from the knowledge that Rome, the republic turned empire, had once prided itself on simple virtues: duty, discipline, and respect for the gods. Now, those same gods were invoked only as distant figures to bless new excesses. The philosopher stepped forward, sandals whispering across mosaic tiles. "Friend," he said to the senator who had invited him, "look upon these faces. Do you see joy or do you see emptiness?" The senator, cheeks flushed from drink, managed a half-hearted smile. "I see delight, teacher. Life is short, why not savor its sweetness?" Musonius answered softly, as though speaking to a wayward pupil. "True sweetness lies not in the tongue, but in the soul. Wine dulls one and starves the other." The senator laughed, but it rang hollow. "Perhaps, yet even the gods dine on ambrosia." "Ambrosia feeds immortals," Musonius said. Drunkenness enslaves men. In that moment, a thunder of applause erupted nearby. A curtain had been drawn aside to reveal a lavish banquet room where guests now surged to see a new spectacle. A silver platter carried by 6 slaves, piled high with roasted peacock and sprinkled with flecks of rare gold leaf. The platter was set before Nero's latest favorite, a minor noble whose name history has forgotten, but whose appetite for extravagance was legendary in his day. As knives sliced the bird, juices dripped onto the marble floor, and the crowd cheered again. Musonius's eyes met those of a slender boy in chains, one of the slaves who had borne the heavy dish. The boy's wrists were raw, and his gaze flickered between fear and resignation. In that silent exchange, the philosopher felt the full weight of the evening. The laughter, the music, the gold that glittered on poultry skin. None of it could hide the suffering or the emptiness beneath the gilded mask. He turned once more to the senator and placed a firm hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Come away," he urged. "There is poison in this room, though it hides behind perfume." The senator hesitated, torn between admiration for the philosopher and the magnetic pull of his peers. In his mind's ear, he heard the warnings of Stoic tutors. Virtue is its own reward. And yet the taste of cinnamon wine lingered sweetly on his tongue. Before he could answer, a sudden hush swept over the hall. From the far doorway entered a figure draped in shimmering white, Poppaea Sabina, the empress herself, wife to Emperor Nero. Her arrival was enough to still every whisper. She glided across the floor like a moonlit whisper, her hair woven with pearls, her expression serene yet cold. Behind her walked attendants holding baskets of rose petals, scattering them at her feet. Poppaea's gaze swept the gathering, settling briefly on Musonius. She recognized him, Rome's moral voice, beloved by many common citizens, but regarded with suspicion by the powerful who feared his influence. With a slight nod, she acknowledged him, a thin smile curving her lips as if to say, "Witness how small your teachings seem against the empire's splendor." Then she addressed the crowd. "Friends of Rome, tonight we honor the bounty that the gods, through my husband's wisdom, have bestowed upon us." Her voice was musical yet edged in iron. "Let joy reign unchecked." A roar of approval followed. Musonius felt the senator beside him lean forward, captivated by the empress's spell. Once again the philosopher spoke, this time loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "When joy breaks its reins, it tramples virtue beneath its hooves." Poppaea heard. Her eyes narrowed, though her smile never faltered. "Virtue," she replied, voice carrying. "Is virtue not found in gratitude? And do we not show gratitude by embracing the gifts given to us?" Musonius bowed his head in respect, yet answered firmly. "Gratitude honors gifts by using them wisely, not by drowning in them." A ripple of uneasy laughter ran through the hall. Some guests, emboldened by wine, scoffed at the philosopher's austerity. Others glanced at him with something like hope that someone might name the emptiness they felt amidst abundance. Poppaea shrugged one graceful shoulder. "Perhaps austerity suits philosophers, but Rome is not built on denial, nor is it sustained by excess," Musonius said. Empires fall as easily from gluttony as from famine. The empress turned away, ending the exchange. Music swelled again, drowning the brief crack of tension. The slaves resumed pouring wine, yet the seed was planted. Whisperers repeated Musonius's words down the line of couches. Later that night, after Poppaea had retired and the guests lay sprawled in stupor, a slender young woman slipped into a quiet corner outside the hall. She wore a plain cloak over her rich gown, hiding her identity. There, by a dying torch, she met a small group of men and women clothed in coarse wool, crosses stitched inside their sleeves. They were early Christians, gathering in secret to share bread and speak of a kingdom not of this world. One of them, a deacon named Marcus, asked gently, "Sister, what news from within?" The woman pulled back her hood, revealing tear-stained cheeks. "They feast while children carry chains," she whispered. "They laugh while slaves bleed. I cannot stay silent." Marcus nodded. "Neither can we. Our teacher spoke of freeing the captive, of love stronger than any empire." Another voice, older and rough, joined in. It was Priscilla, once a widow of means who had sold her household to fund poor believers. "We will care for those children," she said, "and we will speak against the darkness, even if it costs us." In that moment, two worlds touched. The Stoic philosopher, still inside confronting decadence with reason, and the fledgling Christians, outside confronting decadence with compassion and faith. Both forces, though different in doctrine, shared a common flame. A refusal to let Rome's brilliance blind them to its shadows. Before dawn, Musonius left the palace. He walked through the forum, past statues of conquerors, hearing in the hush the distant echoes of revelry fading. At the steps of the Temple of Concord, he paused. The sky was paling. A breeze carried the smell of damp earth. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not to the capricious gods of banquet halls, but to reason itself, that divine spark the Stoics revered. He prayed that Rome might awaken before it consumed itself. Unknown to him, at that same hour deep in a catacomb beyond the city walls, the young woman who had slipped from Poppaea's party knelt by a rough stone altar. She prayed as well, prayed for mercy, for courage, and for the souls lost in the glittering night. Two prayers rose into the dawning light, different yet somehow joined, echoes of resistance in an age of excess. The pale light of early morning crept over Rome, turning marble to soft rose and bronze to a dull glow. Street vendors began to lift their shutters, the clop of mule hooves echoing along stone alleys. Yet beneath this calm surface, rumblings of unrest spread like sparks in dry straw. Word of the previous night's feast, of Musonius Rufus challenging the Empress Poppaea, of slaves staggering under golden platters, of secret prayers whispered in catacombs, traveled fast. In taverns near the Subura, storytellers exaggerated every detail, gesturing wildly as they described the philosopher's bold words and Poppaea's icy smile. Some listeners scoffed, claiming Rome had always bathed in luxury. Others fell silent, troubled by the thought that the empire's splendor rested on broken backs and smothered cries. By midday, Musonius walked through the campus Martius toward the baths of Agrippa, not to bathe, but to meet with a fellow Stoic. Lucius Annius Seneca. Seneca, once Nero's tutor, lived now in cautious retirement, having offered his fortune to the emperor in exchange for permission to withdraw from courtly life. The younger philosopher found the elder seated in a shaded portico, a scroll unrolled across his knee, reed pen poised above fresh wax tablets. Seneca's face, lined by years of political storms, brightened when he saw Musonius. "Friend," Seneca said, rising to clasp his colleague's arm, "I hear you stirred the lion's den last night." Musonius sighed. "I spoke what conscience demanded. The court drowns in honeyed wine while Rome's virtues starve." Seneca gestured for him to sit. Slaves withdrew to a discreet distance. "The emperor's circle will not forgive such honesty," he warned. "Poppaea has Nero's ear. She may whisper that you undermine his glory." Musonius met Seneca's gaze. "If truth undermines him, then glory is built on falsehood." Seneca smiled sadly. "A philosopher's answer, yet emperors seldom share our taste for truth. Still, I believe virtue has power even in poisoned courts." He tapped the scroll. "I draft a dialogue on clemency. Perhaps it will soften Nero's heart." "Perhaps," Musonius said gently. "But hearts armored by luxury are slow to feel." As they spoke, a messenger arrived, clad in plain tunic, face drawn. He bowed deeply. "Master Musonius, a woman waits outside. She claims urgent need of your counsel." Musonius glanced at Seneca, who nodded. "Go, I will visit you soon." Outside stood a tall matron with weary eyes, Antonia, the widow of a modest equestrian. She clasped Musonius's hands. "Master, forgive my boldness. My daughter Julia serves in the palace as handmaiden to Poppaea. She writes that the empress prepares a new festival, 3 nights of revelry. Slaves are already chosen to perform unspeakable acts. Julia fears for them. She begs you to intercede." Musonius felt anger rise like hot iron. "I will do what I can," he said. He thanked her and walked away, mind racing. To confront Poppaea again would be dangerous. Yet to remain silent would be a betrayal of his own teachings. Across the city, below the Aventine Hill, a very different meeting took place. In a dim room lit by oil lamps, followers of the Way, those who called themselves Christians, gathered around an elderly man named Linus, rumored successor to the martyred Peter. Among them sat the noblewoman from Poppaea's feast, her cloak now plain wool. She introduced herself simply as Flavia. She carried 2 loaves of bread wrapped in linen. Linus raised his hands. "Sister Flavia, welcome, speak." Flavia's voice trembled but gained strength. "I have seen the palace's excess. Children are used as toys, men forced to degrade themselves for laughter. We cannot let such darkness persist while we hide in shadows." A young deacon, Timon, shifted uneasily. "If we speak too loudly, soldiers will come. Many families are already marked." Linus's eyes shone with gentle resolve. The teacher did not promise safety. He promised truth. If we believe that every person bears God's image, we must act. Flavia nodded. "I have coin. We can purchase some of the palace slaves. There is a merchant, Felix, who sells quietly. With enough silver, we could free 12 children before the festival begins." Murmurs filled the room. Some feared retaliation. Others felt a surge of courage. At last Linus said, "We will pool what we have. The Lord multiplied loaves, he can multiply coins." While plans formed in secret, rumors reached Poppaea. She was furious that word of her coming festival spread, and that Musonius's critique still echoed through Rome. She summoned Tigellinus, captain of the Praetorian Guard. "I tire of that philosopher," she hissed. "Find a way to humble him publicly," Tigellinus bowed. "As you wish." He knew Musonius taught classes near the temple of Jupiter. The guard captain bribed thugs to disrupt the lessons, shouting insults, accusing the philosopher of plotting rebellion. But Musonius's students, a mix of artisans, soldiers, and slaves, formed a circle around him, shielding him from stones. The attack failed, but tension thickened. Days later, Seneca ventured to Nero's private gardens, scroll in hand. He read aloud passages on mercy, urging the emperor to temper indulgence with virtue. Nero listened, plucking at a cithara string. When Seneca finished, the emperor laughed. "Beautiful words, old master. Yet Rome craves spectacle, not sermons." Seneca bowed, heart heavy. As he departed, he glimpsed Tigellinus whispering to Nero. He feared for Musonius and for Rome. The festival's first night arrived. Torches blazed along the Via Sacra, illuminating crowds drawn by promise of free food and exotic performances. Poppaea presided from a raised dais draped in gold cloth. Musicians played, acrobats tumbled, animals roared in cages. At the center of the ground stood a wooden platform where slaves, painted in bright pigments, reenacted mythic scenes. Zeus pursuing Europa, Dionysus reveling with satyrs. The crowd cheered, but some watched uneasily as children danced in chains shaped like ivy vines. Musonius wove through the throng, cloak pulled low. Near the platform he saw Antonia's daughter Julia, tears streaking her cheeks as she guided the younger slaves. Musonius stepped forward, but guards blocked him. Tigellinus smirked from the shadows. Meanwhile, Flavia and Timon slipped through a side gate with small purses of silver. They found Felix, the merchant, by his wagon. Under hushed negotiation they purchased 3 children, filthy and trembling. Felix warned, "The rest are marked for tonight's finale. Too risky." Flavia swallowed. "We take these now, we will return." They whisked the children into back alleys toward the Aventine, where Christians waited with bread and blankets. Back at the festival, Poppaea signaled. Drums thundered. On the platform, a slave boy dressed as Cupid raised a torch toward a pile of fragrant herbs. Suddenly Musonius's voice rang clear. "Romans, is this your glory to feast on innocence?" Silence rippled before gasps and shouts erupted. Tigellinus barked orders. Guards seized Musonius. He did not resist. The crowd surged, some jeering, others protesting. Julia screamed as soldiers dragged the philosopher past her. Poppaea, face hard as marble, spoke coldly, "Remove this disturbance." Before the torches died, Seneca arrived. He had heard whispers and come at once. Seeing Musonius bound, he stepped before Poppaea. "Majesty, wisdom roots itself in counsel, not in chains. Release him, lest Rome bind its own virtue." Poppaea's eyes flashed. She opened her mouth. Then Nero himself appeared, drawn by clamor. He surveyed the scene, the mix of delight and discontent. For a heartbeat, he weighed spectacle against stability. Seneca bowed. Caesar, show the people that Rome's strength lies in mercy. Nero, ever hungry for applause, spread his arms. I am mercy, he signaled. Guards loosened Musonius's bonds but roughly expelled him from the grounds. The crowd, craving action, accepted the gesture and roared approval. Poppaea fumed but held her tongue. That night Musonius found refuge in a small insula near the Tiber, tended by Christians who cleaned his bruises. Flavia arrived, cloak stained with alley dust. She knelt. We saved 3. Tomorrow we return. Musonius, voice hoarse, said, Your faith moves mountains. I will stand with you. Seneca visited at dawn. He knelt beside the philosopher's pallet. I fear the tide, my friend, but perhaps 2 streams, reason and faith, flow stronger joined. They clasped hands. Outside, city bells rang, calling citizens to the second night of revelry. Yet somewhere in Rome, candles glowed in secret rooms, illuminating scrolls of Stoic maxims and letters from apostles, quiet flames of resistance against the raging feast. The second night of Poppaea's festival gave way to rumpled dawn, the city still echoing with drunken songs and the sharp clatter of discarded amphorae. But while revelers staggered home, small knots of purposeful figures wove through Rome's waking streets. Stoic disciples, tradesmen, and humble believers carried whispered messages between tenements and workshops, linking a network of conscience that stretched from the Aventine's hidden prayer rooms to the philosophical porticos near the Forum. Inside one such portico, Musonius Rufus addressed a hushed semicircle of students. His voice rasped from the beating he had endured, yet conviction sharpened every word. Virtue must stand visible, he said, or tyranny will claim all light. He urged them to bear witness that evening, not with violence, but with steadfast presence, against the cruelties planned for the festival's finale. To the south, in a rented storeroom behind a baker's shop, Linus and Flavia knelt over a wax tablet, tallying coins gathered overnight. A fisherman had donated the price of his nets, a cloth merchant 2 fine tunics to sell, a former legionary the last silver denarii of his pension. When Flavia looked up, tears shone in her eyes. Enough for 5 more children, she whispered. Timon, the young deacon, shouldered a rough sack. Then we move before sunset. While these plans took shape, Poppaea conferred with Tigellinus in the golden chambers of the Palatine. The empress's temper had cooled into a blade of chilled resolve. The philosopher still breathes, she said. The Christians gather slaves. Cut away both roots. Tigellinus promised arrests by nightfall, yet imperial plots seldom remained secret for long. A palace scribe, himself a quiet follower of the way, slipped a scrap of parchment beneath a marble birdbath in the gardens of Sallust, where a fruit seller later retrieved it. The message reached Seneca by midday. He read the brief warning, ARRESTS AT dusk, then tucked it into his sleeve and set off toward the subura, cloak billowing in the dust. He, too, would not be silent. As the sun's disk hovered low above the Capitoline, trumpets blared along the Via Sacra, calling citizens to the grand finale. Torches were lit earlier than the previous nights, casting amber rivers of flame between the milling crowds. Tonight's performance, the heralds promised, would surpass all others. A reenactment of Bacchus leading his followers in ecstatic triumph, complete with costumed satyrs and child dancers bound with ivy chains. Behind a curtained platform, Julia, the handmaiden, adjusted the ivy circlet on a terrified boy's brow. She pressed a smuggled fig into his palm. "Eat quickly," she urged. "Courage!" Her own heart hammered, knowing Flavia's rescue attempt must happen soon or not at all. At the western gate of the grounds, Felix the merchant unloaded cages from his wagon, 5 children and 2 thin teenagers. Flavia and Timon approached, cloaks drawn. Felix eyed the sack of coins, then jerked his chin toward a narrow alley. "Quick," he muttered. But before he could lift the cage latch, a squad of Praetorians rounded the corner. Tigellinus himself rode at their head on a black stallion. "Seize them!" Flavia thrust the coin sack into Felix's hands. "Go!" she hissed. He dove into shadow. Timon tried to shield Flavia, but soldiers wrenched them apart. Shackles clanged. Tigellinus surveyed his captives with grim satisfaction. "The Empress sends her greetings." Within the festival grounds, Musonius had entered among a cluster of craftsmen. News of looming arrests had reached him, yet he walked openly. His students flanked him, eyes alert. Near the central platform, they found Seneca, hooded but unmistakable. The elder philosopher placed a hand on Musonius's shoulder. "The net tightens," he murmured, "but perhaps we can still fray its knots." The performance began. Horns wailed, drums throbbed. A man painted in purple as Bacchus strode forth, brandishing a gilded cup. Children in ivy chains stumbled after, forced to mimic drunken revelry. The crowd erupted in cheers, though pockets of onlookers watched in disturbed silence. Among them, Musonius's students and scattered believers. Halfway through the spectacle, Tigellinus rode to the dais and whispered to Poppaea. She nodded once. He signaled. Guards detached from the perimeter, moving toward Seneca, toward Musonius, toward anyone known for dissent. But at that very moment, distant shouts rose near the western gate. A wagon careened into view, Felix's wagon, its driver whipping mules frantically. Behind it, 6 children clung to its boards. Praetorians pursued on foot, but the wagon barreled straight into the crowd, scattering spectators. Gasps turned to cries of alarm. Musonius seized the rupture in order. Climbing onto a low plinth, he called out, his voice ringing like bronze struck upon marble. "Romans, behold the victims behind your pleasures. Are these the faces of Bacchus or of bondage?" The children, now helped down by Seneca's students, gathered around the philosophers. Their small wrists bore fresh welts. Murmurs rippled, anger and shame mingling. Poppaea rose, fury flashing, but Seneca stepped forward, bowing with stately gravitas. "Caesar's Rome," he proclaimed, "is mighty enough to feast without chains, strong enough to celebrate without cruelty." Tigellinus barked orders. Guards closed in. Yet the crowd, inflamed by wine but stirred by conscience, began to press forward, shielding the children. A stonemason shouted, "Leave the little ones!" A laundress thrust her basket toward a guard's spear. Confusion erupted. Amid the tumult, Linus emerged with believers who had slipped past gates in the chaos. They distributed loaves and water to the rescued children, their quiet charity a rebuke louder than any trumpet. Julia rushed from backstage, tears streaking her painted cheeks, and knelt beside a boy she tried to comfort earlier. Poppaea signaled for Nero, but the emperor hesitated at the sight, citizens rallying not for spectacle, but for mercy. His infamous vanity flitted with calculation, lest he appear cruel before the mob. He lifted both hands. Enough! Silence shuddered through the grounds. Nero descended the dais. "These children shall be freed," he declared, voice ringing for all to hear. "Let Rome witness imperial compassion." Poppaea's face blanched. Tigellinus clenched his jaw but bowed. Guards withdrew. A roar half relief, half disbelief swept the crowd. Musonius met Seneca's eyes. Neither smiled, for each new imperial whims changed like wind. Yet for this heartbeat, light pierced the revel. Nero turned grandly. "Let the feast continue elsewhere. Tonight, Rome honors mercy." With theatrical flair he departed, leaving handlers scrambling to disperse the schedule. The grand finale dissolved, torches guttered. Guests drifted away, unsettled, whispering of philosophers who shamed the palace and children spared by a quirk of Caesar's pride. Hours later, in a starlit courtyard behind a humble insula, Flavia and Timon, newly freed by Nero's gesture, sat with the rescued children. Linus offered thanks in prayer. Nearby, Musonius spoke softly with Julia and Antonia, promising to petition the Senate for broader reforms against exploitation. Seneca, weary yet quietly hopeful, recorded the night's events in wax, intending a treatise on the power of collective conscience. For now dawn approached again, cooler than before. The children, wrapped in spare cloaks, slept in a tangle of small limbs. Over them, stoic reason and Christian compassion formed an unlikely guardianship, two currents meeting, momentarily halting Rome's tide of excess. The struggle was far from over. Poppaea's resentment would not fade, and Tigellinus would sharpen his schemes. Yet as the first birds sang above pantiled roofs, a handful of ordinary Romans had glimpsed another path. A republic of the soul where virtue, not vice, might yet hold sway. The hush that followed the festival's abrupt collapse did not linger for long. By the second sunrise, Rome's gossip mills roared louder than rolling chariots. Every tavern, every bathhouse pool echoed with competing tales. Some swore Nero had seized a sudden spark of compassion. Others insisted the emperor had been outwitted by silver-tongued philosophers and children's tears. Underneath the chatter, fear simmered. The empire's skin had been pricked, and everyone sensed the sting still spreading beneath its glittering surface. Across the Tiber, in a modest courtyard that smelled of laurel and baked bread, Musonius Rufus resumed his daily lectures. Yet the circle of listeners had doubled. Former slaves who had witnessed the rescue, shoemakers seeking guidance, a few daring patrician youths eager for moral clarity, all gathered beneath the vine-strewn pergola. Musonius spoke not of grand revolutions, but of inner fortresses. The tyrant cannot chain your judgment, he reminded them, unless you first chain it yourself. His words floated on warm air, mingling with the chirp of sparrows, seeding resolve in souls that had only yesterday accepted spectacle as fate. Meanwhile, Seneca retreated to his villa on the outskirts, quill scratching parchment through sleepless hours. He drafted a new essay, an appeal addressed to all guardians of the Commonwealth, urging laws to forbid the sale of minors for entertainment. It was both daring and deft, couching its reforms in praise of imperial benevolence, so that Nero might accept the compliment while swallowing the restraint. Seneca knew the blade balanced on his own neck, yet he wrote with the calm of a man resigned to truth's price. Not far away, in the echoing vault of a former grain store, Linus and Flavia organized the rescued children's future. Blankets were stitched from discarded cloaks. One baker offered daily bread. A retired centurion volunteered to teach the older boys simple self-defense and letters. Late into the night, they planned routes to ferry other enslaved youths beyond city walls, toward small Christian farms that dotted the Latin countryside. In soft lamplight, they baptized the youngest, water from a clay jar glinting like glass shards in the glow. Each whispered blessing was a vow to protect innocence where empires failed. Yet storm clouds gathered on the Palatine. Poppaea Sabina nursed her wounded pride like a tigress licking a fresh gash. In her private chamber hung with violet silk, she paced before a mosaic floor depicting Persephone's abduction, a scene she now found pleasantly fitting. Tigellinus stood nearby, helmet tucked beneath his arm, eyes glittering with harsh intent. "My lady," he said, careful to temper frustration with reverence. "The crowd turned because the emperor did. Next time we will shape the crowd first." Poppaea paused. Musonius breathed still. The Christians walk unafraid. Rome's order slips because we allowed a few sobbing children on stage. Never again. "How shall we answer?" Tigellinus asked. "The Stoic and the followers of the crucified thrive on sympathy," she mused. "Strip them of that. Make them appear traitors, not martyrs." Thus rumors surged like unleashed wolves. Whispers spread that Musonius plotted to replace Nero with a Senate puppet, that Christians poisoned wells in vengeance for pagan revels. Anonymous slates appeared on street corners, etched with crude depictions of Stoic beards entwined with serpents. Some citizens scoffed. Others, already uneasy, felt suspicion sprout. Soon Praetorian patrols tightened. One afternoon, soldiers stormed the grain store. Children scattered like startled doves. Linus urged them through a rear opening, but took a spear butt to the ribs before escaping across rooftops. By nightfall, half the bread basket donors were in chains, dragged to holding cells that stank of lamp smoke and fear. When news reached Musonius, he did not call for revolt. Instead, he walked straight to the forum, mounted the rostra while magistrates adjudicated minor disputes, and spoke to the milling populace. "If lies bind our city," he declared, voice steady though guards hovered, "then let truth cut every knot." He recounted each event, how slaves had been purchased, not stolen, how no well bore poison, only drought of conscience. His clarity struck some hearts like steel on flint. Others muttered, cowed by hovering spears. but seeds of doubt lodged in the official rumor. Tigellinus, observing from the Senate steps, ground his teeth. "This man speaks as though he fears no blade," he spat. Poppaea's directive hardened: silence the philosopher, sever the Christian's roots. In a small, candle-lit room beneath the baths of Titus, Flavia tended Linus's bruised side while Timon read aloud from a worn letter words of Paul the Apostle, urging perseverance under trial. A soft knock sounded. Julia slipped inside, cloak hooded low. "More arrests tonight," she whispered. "The guard captain marks every house linked to the rescue." Flavia's jaw tightened. "Then we disperse. Little groups, many homes, they cannot snuff us all." Linus, wincing upright, added, "And we carry records of freed children out of the city. Truth preserved is truth that rises again." They devised secret signals, 3 taps on a door, a scrap of purple thread tied around a wrist to identify safe havens. Before dawn, pairs and trios melted into alleys, carrying bundles of bread and scripture. Above them, Nero's torches flickered across marble, unaware of the silent exodus threading his capital like hidden veins of resistance. The following week, Seneca presented his essay to an assembly of senators. Some listened politely, some yawned, but a handful, jaded by years of decadence, felt a flicker of admiration. One elderly ex-consul, Marcus Lepidus, stood. "If we cannot protect our weakest," he said, "we invite the gods to weigh our worth in chains." His speech rippled outward, emboldening minor magistrates to question the slave spectacles that funded their patrons' feasts. Poppaea countered with lavish gestures, free grain distributions, a circus featuring imported leopards. Yet each golden loaf bore the shadow of stolen youth, each roaring cat reminded crowds of chained children. Public opinion quivered in the balance, not yet tipping, but no longer blind. Tigellinus chose force. At dusk he led a raid on Musonius's lecture portico. Students formed a human wall, soldiers cracked shields against bare forearms. Musonius, pushed to his knees, called out, "Stand firm in reason!" Blood traced his brow. The guards hauled him toward the Mamertine prison, where cold stone swallowed many dissident breaths. That same night, Linus was captured near the Appian Gate while guiding 2 orphans toward a vineyard refuge. Flavia and Timon slipped into shadows, hearts hammering. They circled back to warn Seneca, who opened his villa despite risk. By lamplight they planned a daring move, to petition Nero directly, invoking the emperor's earlier display of mercy. Seneca, though aware of the knife's edge, agreed to deliver the plea, a final gamble of persuasion over steel. The day of the petition dawned sweltering. In the imperial gardens, peacocks screamed as if sensing tension. Seneca, robes immaculate, approached Nero's pavilion. He bowed deeply, scroll outstretched. Poppaea watched, eyes glittering. Tigellinus lingered by a column, fingers drumming his sword hilt. Nero unfurled the scroll. His gaze flicked across the calm yet urgent prose. Release Musonius, free the harmless followers of the new faith, cement your legacy through clemency rather than fear. A vain emperor's pulse quickened at the word legacy. Yet Poppaea's whisper slithered into his ear. Mercy invites mockery. Strength commands awe. Nero's brow furrowed. Outside the palace gate, citizens gathered. They bore no torches, no weapons, only olive branches and scraps of linen bearing the names of detained children. Flavia stood at their head, Julie at her side, Timon holding Linus's walking staff aloft though its owner languished in chains. The assembly hummed with quiet determination, a river of potential upheaval. Within, Nero weighed spectacle against conscience. His silence stretched like drawn wire until the marble floor seemed to vibrate. Seneca waited, old eyes steady. Poppaea smiled, certain of victory. Tigellinus's hand stroked cold bronze. The emperor at last spoke, a single sentence that would echo across Rome by sundown. What he said, mercy or menace, will decide who walks free, who bends beneath iron, and whether stoic resolve and humble faith can tame an empire drunk on its own glitter. But that moment, sharp as a knife's point, balanced still in the heat-shimmered garden, and Rome held its breath. Nero sat in silence while cicadas sang in the distant pines. A bead of sweat slid from beneath his laurel wreath and fell onto the parchment in his lap, blurring an inked phrase. He read the words again, "Clemency builds an empire stronger than fear," and felt a strange tug in his chest. It was not mercy, not really. It was vanity, the hope that poets might one day praise him as Nero the kindly, not Nero the cruel. Yet Poppaea's soft voice pressed against his thoughts like a jeweled dagger. She warned of weakness. Tigellinus promised order through iron. And outside the palace gate, a crowd gathered with olive branches that could so quickly turn to torches if ignored. At last Nero spoke. His voice drifted across the garden like a slow drumbeat. "Seneca, I will grant half your plea. The philosopher Musonius shall live, but not in Rome. Exile him to the island of Jaros. As for the followers of the new faith, their leaders may leave the city in peace. Their gatherings, however, remain forbidden within these walls." It was mercy cut with menace, a cup of watered wine. Seneca bowed, sensing this was the highest kindness the emperor would give. Poppaea's smile tightened, yet she accepted the compromise. The thorn of Musonius removed, the Christians scattered. Tigellinus, disappointed by the half-measure, nevertheless saluted. Word rushed from palace steps to the waiting crowd. Flavia felt her knees sag. Julia squeezed her hand. Some wept with relief that bloodshed was spared. Others mourned an exile that smelled too much like slow death. The olive branches remained intact, but their leaves drooped in the afternoon heat. That evening, chains clinked quietly in the Mamertine prison as guards unlocked Musonius's cell. Seneca entered, eyes damp with regret. "Friend, the emperor spares your life but commands you to Jaros. A ship sails at dawn." Musonius rose, joints aching. "Exile is no enemy to virtue," he murmured. "The soul travels farther than oars." Still, he placed a steady hand on Seneca's arm. "Guard your heart, old lion, palaces chew honest tongues." In a courtyard nearby, Linus limped from his cell, escorted by lesser soldiers. They thrust a parchment into his hands, an imperial decree of banishment. He was to leave within 3 days, never returning under pain of death. His ribs throbbed, but relief fluttered in his chest that he would walk under open sky again. Seneca arranged for Linus and a dozen believers, including flustered Timon, to depart under cover of dusk. Flavia refused to leave Julia behind. The young handmaiden, with Poppaea's cold gaze still on her, chose flight as well. They walked through back streets, clutching small satchels of bread and parchments. At the Milvian bridge, they met a fisherman who owed Linus a favor. By moonlight, they slipped into a flat-bottomed boat and drifted silently north along the Tiber, towards safe farms among the Sabine hills. Jaros was a barren jewel lost in the Aegean, ringed by cliffs where gulls screamed like restless souls. Musonius arrived after 9 days at sea, salted wind carving lines deeper into his sunburned face. The Roman prefect who greeted him laughed. Here wisdom may echo only to rocks. Yet wisdom, like seed on cracked earth, found stubborn purchase. Fishermen soon wandered to the Stoics' cave to ask about tempering anger, about feeding families when nets came back empty. Musonius taught them to weave sturdier lines, to share catch before hunger bred theft, to keep nightly councils where each man spoke without fear. Within weeks, quarrels lessened, and even the prefect's guards sought quiet counsel on sleepless nights. The cave's mouth glowed with oil lamps and hope. Stories of the island philosopher drifted back across the sea on merchant sails. Some reached Seneca, whose own safety eroded day by day as Nero's paranoia sharpened. Yet in late letters he smuggled out, Seneca wrote, "Though empire casts bodies outward, truth returns on every tide." North of Rome, in the shadow of stony ridges, Linus and Flavia built a refuge on a patch oft-donated field. They raised a rough chapel of cypress planks and an orphan house with reed-thatched roof. The rescued children tended goats and learned letters scratched in charcoal on wood slabs. Julia taught them songs once performed in the palace, lyrics now washed clean of decadence, melodies that drifted over hill grass at dusk. Travelers stopped for water and stayed for stories. They carried news. The emperor blamed a new fire in a warehouse on careless slaves, then secretly on Christians. Arrests resumed closer to the city, yet tales of kindness at the Sabine refuge spread wider, balancing terror with rumor of an alternative Rome, one stitched from bread, song, and shared labor. One late summer day, a weary courier arrived bearing a scroll sealed by wax impressed with a dolphin. It was from Musonius on Jaros. His words, though few, shone, "Virtue grows even in exile's dust. Stand firm. Seas connect more than they divide." Linus read the letter aloud and wept. Flavia tucked it into a clay jar beneath the altar for future hearts to find. Back in Rome, Poppaea's grand house glittered, but whispers curled like smoke in its corridors. Some claimed the empress had lost favor of the gods for exiling a just man. Others said Nero now composed verses about mercy, copying lines from Seneca's treatise to flatter visiting senators. Tigellinus, sensing shifting winds, tightened patrols yet also hosted lavish races to distract the crowds. The city throbbed between fear and boredom, its moral compass spinning. Seneca, feeling the noose of suspicion close, finally penned a farewell to his friends and ordered poison prepared in a humble cup. Before dawn he drank, veins cooling as he spoke one last time of reason and courage. His death echoed like a bell over Rome, shaking even hardened legionaries. People remembered that he had argued for children and compassion, not conquest. Musonius learned of Seneca's end from a fishing boat. He led a silent vigil on the shore. Flames danced atop driftwood while waves beat slow dirges against the rocks. The Stoic told gathered islanders, "A philosopher dies, yet his words breathe in every just act." They answered by passing bread hand to hand in the dark, a communion of resolve. Years turned, emperors fell. Some historians later wrote that nothing changed. Rome still savored spectacle. Yet in hidden schools, teachers quoted Musonius on self-restraint. In growing house churches, elders recited Linnaeus's tales of rescued children. Traders who hailed from Jarrows, from Sabine farms, told port city crowds about a softer rule beside the Tiber that once flickered like a lamp against storm clouds. Even within official temples, a few sculptors began to carve smaller statues of Pieta's duty, her face no longer stern but tender, cradling a child. An old stonemason who had once yelled, "Leave the little ones" at Poppaea's festival, chiseled those gentle eyes. He thought of Musonius's bruised brow and Linnaeus's cracked ribs, and he carved humility into marble veins. The empire never fully surrendered its taste for excess, but cracks widened where compassion seeped. When plague struck decades later, doctors trained in Stoic clinics treated slave and senator alike. When a famine emptied granaries, Christian networks that Linnaeus helped weave ferried grain along roads first trod in secret. Some called it chance, others providence. On a calm evening long after Nero's torchlight faded, Julia, older now, gray at her temples, stood on a ridge above the Sabine refuge. Children's laughter echoed through olive groves. She held Musonius's last letter, creased and sun-bleached, and she whispered, "We are still here." In the valley below, fires glowed like tiny stars, each one a memory of the night a city almost chose mercy. History rarely honors quiet victories. Yet somewhere in dusty scrolls, scribes noted that in the reign of Nero there were philosophers and followers of a new faith who dared lift chains from children, who spoke against gilded cruelty, who lived their exile as witness. Their names survived, not on triumphal arches, but in the slow turning of hearts that learned to question feasts built on tears. And so the story closes not with roaring crowds, but with a hush. The hush of a sea washing Jarrows, of evening prayer among Sabine pines, of pages turning in candle-lit rooms where students search old words for courage. Stoic reason and humble faith did not topple the empire in a single stroke. They planted seeds in its cracks, and generations later those seeds would split stone. The sun was still low over the forum when the first whispers spread across the marble steps. They carried on the cool morning air like sparks, drifting from mouth to mouth, until every trader, orator, and idler sensed that something extraordinary was about to unfold. A senator in a dark-striped toga strode toward the rostra, clutching a small roll of parchment as if it were a dagger. No herald announced him, no lictor parted the crowd. Yet all eyes followed his path. for in Rome a single sheet of papyrus, unrolled in public, could destroy a man's life more swiftly than a legion's charge. The speaker was Gaius Scribonius Curio the Elder, a seasoned performer who knew that timing and tone mattered more than truth. He waited until the chatter grew restless, then raised the parchment high. "Citizens," he said, letting the word hang in the hush, "I hold in my hand the private letter of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, praetor of this very city, wherein he confesses to dealings with the rebel Sertorius." Gasps rippled outward. Some muttered prayers to the household gods, others craned their necks, hungry for scandal. Curio read aloud, his voice smooth as oil. "I write to you, noble Sertorius, in hopes that we may divide the spoils of Rome when the traitors in the Senate have been overthrown." The line was pure invention. Yet who could prove it false? The seal looked authentic. The handwriting, imitated by a skilled slave, resembled Lepidus's careful script. By the time Curio finished, Lepidus's reputation was in ashes, and within a fortnight he was stripped of office, exiled to Sardinia, and forgotten by all but his closest kin. Such scenes were not rare. In the late Republic, the Forum stones rang daily with denunciations, each sharper than the last. Roman politics was warfare without swords. Men who had marched together under the same eagle might, the next day, hurl accusations of incest, bribery, or treason. The weapon of choice was the spoken word, but its ammunition came in many forms. Forged letters, secret diaries, intercepted messages written hastily by candlelight. A rumor, once loosed, traveled faster than any courier, and when a rumor was read aloud, captured in the grainy ink of a stolen scroll, its power doubled, for the crowd could point and say, "I heard it with my own ears." Cicero understood this art better than most. He built his fame on oratory, yet his sharpest victories came not from elegant clauses, but from raw exposure. During the Catilinarian crisis, he called the Senate to the temple of Jupiter Stator, and produced letters allegedly written by Catiline's accomplices. Some scholars still doubt their authenticity, but the effect was electric. Catiline, cornered by words alone, fled into the night and died in battle, branded a public enemy. Cicero boasted that he had saved the Republic with a few remarks. He did not mention the scribes he paid to mimic Catiline's hand. Public reading was only one blade in Rome's arsenal of defamation. Another was the Contio, the people's assembly where speakers could address the masses from a wooden platform. Here, accusations were unleashed without need for proof. If the orator's voice rang clear and the tale thrilled the crowd, the damage was done. Lucius Appuleius Saturninus once denounced his rival Gaius Memmius for slaughtering Italian allies during a wine-soaked feast. The charge was absurd, but Memmius's campaign collapsed. No citizen wished to vote for a man reeking of imaginary blood. Even private homes were not safe. At elegant dinner parties, poison in the cup might be subtler than poison of the tongue, yet a whispered story could linger longer than any venom. When Julia, Julius Caesar's daughter, died in childbirth, mourners gathered at Caesar's villa. Amid the laments, someone murmured that Julia had long suffered cruelty from her husband Pompey. The tale sprinted through Rome, and within days graffiti appeared on tavern walls. Pompey kills wives with silence. No one traced the rumor's source, but Caesar's agents had motive enough. They sought to weaken Pompey before the coming conflict. Historians argue still whether Caesar sanctioned the slander, but they agree on its outcome. Pompey's standing slid inch by inch until the triumvirate cracked. Letters, assemblies, dinner tables, each played its role. Yet the grandest display of reputational warfare came in the year when Octavian, the future Augustus, unveiled Mark Antony's will. The Senate chamber buzzed as Octavian rose, face composed. On his signal, 2 Vestal virgins entered bearing a sealed scroll they had retrieved from the temple of Vesta, where Antony had placed it for safekeeping. Tradition held a man's testament sacred, revealed only after death. Octavian broke that taboo with calculated calm. He read clauses that named Cleopatra's children heirs to Roman territories, clauses pledging Antony's body for burial in Alexandria rather than Italy. Senators shifted in their seats, outrage wrestling with delight at the spectacle. Octavian needed no eloquence. The words, dripping with perceived betrayal, performed the execution. Within months, war erupted. Antony lost not just battles, but the faith of Rome, all because of a parchment meant never to see the light. Why did such tactics flourish? Partly because Rome's legal system relied on reputation. Character, dignitas, was currency. A man with a stain upon his name could not command legions, win magistracies, or sway juries. Thus enemies struck first at dignity. Moreover, literacy was spreading. More citizens could read than ever before, but few had access to private archives. A publicly displayed letter, real or false, carried the allure of forbidden insight. Crowds trusted the ink more than any oath, and once a scandal ignited, it found ready tinder in Rome's hunger for drama. Amphitheaters might be filled with blood, but the forum offered a subtler carnage, where a sentence could inflict wounds no surgeon could stitch. Not all victims accepted their fate. Some fought back with counterattacks. When Clodia accused Marcus Caelius Rufus of poisoning her wine and plotting murder, Cicero defended Caelius by launching a counter-scandal. In the speech Pro Caelio, he painted Clodia as a seductress who hosted nightly orgies and corrupted youth. Whether true mattered little. The Senate roared with laughter, and Caelius walked free. Clodia's social standing, once unassailable, crumbled like plaster beneath rain. Others sought refuge in exile, where a tarnished name weighed less. Publius Quinctilius Verus, before his ill-fated German campaign, endured whispers that he extorted provinces to fund lavish feasts. Rather than duel each rumor, he pursued command abroad, hoping military glory would drown the gossip. Fate had other plans. After losing 3 legions in Teutoburg Forest, Verus's reputation sank beyond rescue, proof that scandal and catastrophe often traveled hand in hand. The methods of slander evolved with the empire. Under Tiberius, delators, professional informers, filed written accusations to the emperor, bypassing the crowd but achieving similar ends. A clever delator could doom a senator with a single scroll, trading someone else's downfall for imperial favor. By Nero's reign, Rome breathed accusations like air. Anyone might awaken to find his name on a wax tablet posted at the Senate door, listing crimes imagined overnight. Yet for all the darkness, these practices revealed Rome's paradoxical faith in words. Though the sword ruled provinces, the Republic's ghost lingered in its rhetoric. Citizens still believed that language could shape reality, that a speech could topple tyrants or uplift heroes. The danger lay not in speech alone, but in the ease with which truth could be bent. And so reputations rose and fell like banners in a shifting wind, each gust powered by parchment, whisper, and voice. The crowd that morning, after Curio's performance, dispersed slowly, buzzing like insects around ripe fruit. Some cursed Lepidus's name, others doubted, but few dared say so aloud. Meanwhile, Curio slipped down a colonnade where his scribe awaited payment for the forgery. Across town, Lepidus received word of his disgrace before finishing breakfast. He would spend the day drafting rebuttals none would believe, for Rome had already judged him guilty. In the capital of the world, once the rumor began to shout, the truth could only whisper. The moon hung low over the Palatine Hill when the first rumor coiled through the shadows like a soft hiss. It said that the Empress Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, had taken a lover, nothing new to jaded ears. Yet this time she had gone further. She had, the whisper claimed, held an actual wedding with the young Senator Gaius Silius, while the emperor inspected aqueduct repairs outside the city. By sunrise, the tale slithered into every tavern, but a rumor alone could be dismissed as envy. What turned it into a spear was a scroll, found at dawn pinned to the bronze doors of the Curia. A sworn statement, allegedly from Silius's own scribe, listing the witnesses, the vows, the drunken songs. The handwriting matched other documents from Silius's household, for it had been traced the night before by a clever freedman in Messalina's own circle, one who feared her rising power. When Claudius returned, the Senate forced the letter into his trembling hands. Reading each line in the glaring noon light, he felt his dignitas crumble. Messalina's feast of passion ended in a garden execution, and Silius fell beside her, proof that in Rome even love could be sharpened into a political blade. Years earlier, Rome had seen another kind of reputation kill, orchestrated not by jealous rivals, but by a single man's ambition. Lucius Aelius Sejanus, prefect of the Praetorian Guard, sought to climb beyond his birth. He studied the Emperor Tiberius, learned his fears, and turned them into weapons. Sejanus kept a secret desk of wax tablets, each bearing rumors he wished to plant. That Agrippina the elder plotted poison, that her son Nero Julius planned a coup. By day he smiled in Senate sessions. By night he sent agents to slip these tablets into the hands of informers, the delators, who would read them aloud before gullible crowds. Tiberius, old and brooding on the island of Capri, received a steady river of letters describing imaginary plots. The emperor trusted the ink more than his own blood. When the purge began, Agrippina starved in exile, her sons fell to forced suicides, and Sejanus stood unchallenged, until, at last, a letter reached Tiberius exposing the prefect's own designs. The same mechanism that raised Sejanus destroyed him. public reading of a private message. One autumn morning, the Senate listened as the emperor's envoy recited Tiberius's indictment against his once trusted guard. Before sunset, the statues of Sejanus lay hacked in the gutters, and mothers taught their children that words could be deadlier than iron. Not every assault required forged parchments. Sometimes a single phrase, repeated with practiced timing, could unmake a career. Take the case of Gnaeus Domitius Calvinus, who sought the consulship in the reign of Augustus. His rival, Lucius Munatius Plancus, waited until the Campus Martius filled with voters. Then Plancus stood atop the rostra and asked, in a tone of sorrow too perfect to be honest, whether the people could entrust their fortunes to a man who once cheated his own father's will. He offered no proof. He merely repeated the charge in different words, letting the poison soak. Calvinus floundered. Every denial sounded thin beside that solemn voice. The crowd, loving drama more than evidence, turned against him. He lost the election, and the rumor followed him for the rest of his days, though the estate records later showed no sign of fraud. In Rome, a stain need not be real to be permanent. While senators dueled in daylight, another theater of slander unfolded after dark. On quiet street scribes posted small square tablets coated in light wax, libelli famosi, infamous little books, inscribed with verses mocking elite figures. Passers-by stopped to read lines that compared a stern censor to a goat snuffling maidservants, or hinted that a pious matron welcomed gladiators to her villa. These lampoons were anonymous, their rhymes crude, their effect enormous. A seasoned official might shrug off one attack, but a chain of lampoons could erode the hardest reputation. During the rule of Emperor Domitian, such verses became so sharp that he stationed guards to tear them down by torchlight. Yet the more he chased them, the more they sprouted, for fear is fertile soil for satire. And when Domitian himself fell to assassins, Romans swore that the first blow had been dealt by laughing couplets hammered to the Senate door. Women, too, mastered the craft of reputational war. Scribonia, first wife of Augustus, never forgave him for their divorce. Lacking armies, she wielded servants' gossip like arrows. At her evening salons she praised modesty, then floated subtle hints that Augustus enjoyed moonlit visits to his stepdaughter Julia's window, or that he planned to claim divine honors while still alive. Listeners nodded, pretended to dismiss the notions, and by next morning repeated them at the baths. Augustus's moral reforms made him vulnerable. A single whisper of vice could undo his sermons against adultery. Though historians doubt the worst of these tales, they nudged public opinion, forcing the princeps to exile his own daughter to preserve the image Scribonia had cracked. Sometimes, however, truth itself needed no embellishment. Publius Clodius Pulcher provided his enemies ready fodder by sneaking, disguised as a woman, into a ceremony of the sacred Bona Dei held in Caesar's home. When the scandal broke, Cicero thundered in court that Clodius had violated the very hearth of Rome. He brandished sworn statements from servants describing Clodius's perfume, his silly falsetto greeting, his near confession when caught. Clodius escaped conviction through bribes, yet the story clung to him. His later laws and riots could not erase the picture of a lecherous aristocrat in stolen slippers, and whenever Cicero wished to weaken Clodius's faction, he needed only utter the phrase, "Good goddess," with a knowing smile. Laughter finished the work. By the age of Trajan, official channels tried to tame chaos with stricter libel statutes, but reputational combat adapted. Accusers now wrapped slander in philosophy. The historian Tacitus, writing of Emperor Galba's final hours, described him as too old to command, too greedy to retire. The phrase entered dinner talk, then speeches, then common wisdom. Galba's corpse had long cooled, yet his name carried that verdict forever. When senators debated new laws, they quoted Tacitus more than any legal code, proving that a polished sentence could outlive marble monuments. Why did the people relish these downfalls? Partly for sport, the same thrill that drew them to chariot crashes and beast hunts. But deeper still lay a collective belief that greatness must be tested. If a man crumbled under rumor, perhaps he lacked the virtue to wield power. Thus scandals served as trials by firelight. Yet the system was cruel. The innocent burned as readily as the guilty, and skill with rhetoric counted more than factual defense. Even emperors dreaded the sudden buzz of a rumor. Hadrian, touring provinces, carried with him a portable library of decrees to refute any charge before it grew. When a pamphlet accused him of plotting to move the capital to Alexandria, he summoned the Alexandrian envoys in public, made them swear no such plan existed, then rewarded them with marble statues, turning potential mutiny into gratitude. He understood that speed could strangle slander before it walked. Still, no strategy guaranteed safety. Reputations in Rome were like clay tablets left in rain. They might endure for a season, but sooner or later the letters blurred. And so citizens watched, lips half smiling, as another victim fell, secretly thankful it was not their turn. Yet, by the time Constantine ruled from his new marble capital at Byzantium, the empire had learned to mix old tricks with new faith. Christianity had spread through palaces and marketplaces alike, and with it came fresh ways to wound a rival's honor. No longer could an orator simply accuse a senator of drunken nights with dancing girls. Now he might hint that the man consorted with pagan astrologers or secretly worshipped the wrong god. The blade of scandal had gained a sharper edge, forged from piety and fear. Constantine himself discovered how swiftly rumor could bleed a dynasty. His eldest son, Crispus, was a bright commander who had driven rebellious fleets from the narrow Bosporus Strait. Soldiers praised him, bishops blessed him, and poets compared him to Alexander. All seemed set for a smooth succession, until Empress Fausta, Constantine's second wife, whispered that Crispus harbored unholy desires for her. She never put the charge in writing. She needed no forged letter. Instead, she wept in a shaded corridor where Constantine's most trusted eunuch would find her. The eunuch carried her tears to the emperor, adding a careful detail: that Crispus had sworn to abandon Christ's law if Fausta became his. Outraged, Constantine summoned a secret council at Trier. There, without trial or testimony, He ordered Crispus confined in a chilly bathhouse and left him to suffocate under stale steam. For weeks the court spoke only in murmurs, but guilt gnawed at Constantine like frost at stone. Bishop Osius of Cordoba, who had guided the emperor at the Council of Nicaea, pressed for inquiry. At last, a slave girl confessed that the empress had invented the crime. Perhaps she craved the throne for her own sons. Perhaps she hated Crispus's mother, the late Minervina. Whatever the cause, Fausta's lie now burned. Constantine, torn between grief and rage, refused a public trial. Instead, he ordered iron plates heated white-hot, laid upon the floor of Fausta's private chamber. She entered, the doors were barred, and steam rose once more. In a single year, the empire had witnessed a son suffocated by slander, and a stepmother roasted by retribution. All without a single scroll of evidence. Chroniclers wrote that Constantine erected churches afterward in penitence. Proof that even the first Christian emperor could not cleanse rumor's stain with holy water alone. Across the sea in Carthage, a different battle of reputations unfolded under quieter arches. There lived an advocate named Cyprian of Thapsus, gifted with gentle speech, but cursed by enemies in the provincial council. They feared his rising voice, so they sought to break it with parchment. One night a packet slipped beneath the basilica door, a collection of letters, supposedly in Cyprian's hand, praising the outlawed Donatist sect and mocking the emperor's decrees. The council convened at dawn. The oldest decurion read the letters aloud, his trembling tone suggesting he, too, feared their power. The crowd demanded Cyprian's banishment, yet Cyprian appeared, scrolls under arm, and calmly revealed that the ink on the forged letters was still fresh. The wax seals copied, but not impressed deep enough. He asked the council to compare the shapes of his usual sigil, two crossed fish, against the single smudged anchor of the forgeries. The ruse collapsed. Accusers found themselves accused. Cyprian's reputation not only survived but soared, teaching Rome a rare lesson. That truth could, on occasion, outshine pretense when delivered with steady courage. But such victories were scarce. In the western provinces, Stilicho, the half-vandal general who held young Emperor Honorius's trembling reins, met a darker end. Stilicho had kept the frontiers intact, bribing barbarian chieftains and balancing fragile treaties. Yet his success bred jealousy among court eunuchs, who resented his foreign blood and stern pride. Working in candle-lit libraries, they assembled a dossier of half-truths. Copies of Stilicho's letters to Alaric the Goth, receipts for gold sent across Danube camps, notes of private audiences held at Ravenna's palace baths. Each document bore genuine ink but crooked meaning. The eunuchs presented the dossier to Honorius with theatrical sighs, claiming Stilicho aimed to seat his own son on the throne. Honorius, never brave, ordered the general seized within a church. Stilicho bowed to the altar, too loyal or too tired to resist. Axes fell. Yet when Goths flooded Italy months later, citizens cursed Honorius for slaying the one man who could have saved them. Reputation, once murdered, can return as a ghost that haunts the killer. Even humble scribblers learned to navigate this perilous game. Ammianus Marcellinus, a retired soldier turned historian, traveled with bundles of wax tablets tied to his belt. Whenever he entered a tavern, he listened before speaking, for a careless word might sprout into damning anecdote. He wrote that tongues in Rome are sharper than swords in Persia, and told how a single jest about Emperor Constantius's bald head cost a lawyer his property. Ammianus survived by mastering a delicate craft, recording scandals without becoming their target. He never forged letters, but he knew their power, and his histories, copied by monks centuries later, preserved those lethal whispers long after the bodies they ruined had turned to dust. By the age of Valentinian and Valens, the empire split east and west, but rumor respected no frontier. Couriers carried edicts, merchants carried spice, and gossip rode with both. When Valens lost an army to the Persians near Ctesiphon, word reached Rome that he sacrificed Christian prisoners to Mars before battle. Senators inimical to Valens spread the tale, adding that a black-haired sorceress guided the ritual. Sculptors in the Subura carved small figurines of Valens clutching a demon's horn, selling them for a denarius apiece. Children rattled them in the streets, chanting, "Valens feeds the dark god." No imperial decree could recall the figurine once it became toy. No censor could silence children at play. Thus reputations fell not only to eloquent speeches, but to marketplace trinkets, woven into culture like threads in wool. Inside monasteries rising along the Tiber, new chroniclers considered these spectacles with mixed dread and fascination. One, a monk named Sulpicius, wrote that Rome's addiction to slander proved the devil's continuing rule over tongues. He recounted how clerics used forged letters to brand rivals heretics, ensuring bishoprics for themselves. Yet he also noted that scandal sometimes unmasked true villains. Like smoke reveals hidden fire, he penned, rumor reveals hidden sin. His manuscript traveled north, copied in Gaul, influencing councils that weighed rumors as evidence of moral rot. And so, by late antiquity, the mechanism of compromat had become both tradition and curse. The public reading of letters, the anonymous lampoon nailed to a city gate, the whispered charge of forbidden worship, these evolved into rituals as Roman as triumph arches or senatorial togas. They outlived legions, survived plagues, and even found new life in barbarian courts that rose on Rome's ruins. When Ostrogothic King Theodoric held assemblies in Ravenna, he kept scribes ready to inspect any scroll produced against a rival. Sometimes he fed the writer to his fish pond if the seal proved false. Other times he rewarded him with gold, for even among Goths, information was wealth. What lessons lingered? One, that power fears mockery more than steel. Two, that the written word once exposed cannot be re-rolled like a scroll, its edges cut forever. And three, that reputations, though airy as breath, weigh more than marble when empires tremble. Long after Rome's aqueducts cracked and its laws crumbled, the art of reputational war remained. A Roman export no barbarian ever wished to destroy. When the emperors moved their throne eastward, and the ancient city of Byzantium became Constantinople, the old Roman art of ruining a rival's name did not fade. It simply slipped into brighter silks, learned Greek phrases, and kept cutting with the same sharpened quills. The great dome of Hagia Sophia soared above marble streets, yet beneath its shadow courtiers still measured power by rumor and ruin. No blade gleamed sharper than a whispered story read aloud in the palace corridors. The most feared pen in the early 6th century belonged to a civil servant named Procopius. By day, he drafted bland decrees for Emperor Justinian, praising new aqueducts and law codes. By night, he filled a hidden notebook with tales too poisonous for daylight. In those secret pages, later titled the Anecdota or Secret History, Procopius sketched Justinian as a demon in human flesh and Empress Theodora as a harlot who bewitched the court. He collected every scandal, true, twisted, or invented, and stitched them into a tapestry of horror. Word of the notebook's existence leaked through servants. Senators began to trade hints. Did you hear the Empress once danced naked with geese? Did you know the Emperor's eyes glowed red at dusk? None had read the pages. Yet the very rumor that such pages existed weakened respect for the Purple Throne. Procopius never dared read his work aloud while Justinian lived. But the mere threat of exposure made him powerful. When a Praetorian prefect tried to seize Procopius's land near Caesarea, the clerk let slip that certain anecdotes about the prefect's youth, theft from temple funds, nights with circus boys, might find their way into the secret manuscript. The prefect backed away. Reputation had become a hostage, and Procopius held the rope. Beyond parchment, factions used chants as living missiles. The rival racing clubs of Constantinople, the Blues and the Greens, filled the hippodrome with color, beer, and rage. During intermissions, they shouted verses aimed at ministers whose policies angered them. "Long live the Greens" could flip into "Hang John the Cappadocian." And thousands of throats would carry the cry from arena to street. In January of the year 532, the chants grew into the Nika riot. Whisperers claimed Justinian meant to tax every citizen for rebuilding the city walls. Others swore the empress had mocked the Virgin in private jest. Blues and Greens merged in fury, roaring, "Nika, conquer!" Soldiers hesitated, believing the gossip. Ministers hid. Only Theodora stood firm, delivering her famous line that royal purple makes a fine burial shroud. Her resolve crushed the riot, yet scholars now suspect she also released counter-rumors. That Green leaders planned to crown a rival emperor, that Blues would lose their racing subsidies. Panic fractured the rebels, making them easy prey for Belisarius's troops. Thus one rumor lit the fire, another quenched it, and both left whole districts in ashes. Even the church, guardian of souls, wielded slander as holy spear. Monks who opposed icons circulated letters from heaven, declaring Christ forbade painted images. Icon supporters replied with their own forged epistles, allegedly penned by long-dead saints, praising sacred art. Each side read these texts aloud in crowded basilicas, turning devotion into duel. A single scroll could swing village opinion, and with it the collection of tithes. When Emperor Leo the Isaurian championed iconoclasm, His agents pinned decrees to church doors accusing image lovers of pagan idolatry. Iconophil monks answered by carving tiny wooden tablets showing Leo with donkey ears. Pilgrims carried the caricatures across Anatolia. Soon children in market stalls sang of Leo the braying king. Dignity cracked, policies stalled, and the icon wars raged for generations, all fueled by paper, paint, and playground rhyme. Across the Mediterranean in the crumbling West, petty kings copied imperial tricks. In 7th century Gaul, Queen Brunhild fought a brutal war of letters against the noblewoman Fredegund. Brunhild sent envoys bearing parchments that listed Fredegund's alleged poisonings and adulteries. Fredegund bribed bishops to preach sermons calling Brunhild a foreign witch who drank infant blood. Battles followed words. When Fredegund finally died, Brunhild seemed victorious, until young King Clotaire II gathered a council and read aloud a new dossier, thick with accusations that Brunhild murdered 10 princes. The scrolls were stitched from earlier rumors, some true, many false, but recited before armed nobles, they sealed Brunhild's fate. She was bound to a wild stallion and torn apart on the plain, demonstration that in post-Roman Europe slander still drew blood. Not every victim met such an end. Some twisted the currents in their favor. In the Abbasid court of Baghdad, where Greek translators preserved old Roman histories, viziers studied those tales and refined them. One minister, Barmakid Yahya, learned that leaking a rival's poem hinting at secret Zoroastrian leanings could ruin him faster than any blade. The Caliph, guardian of Islam, would not tolerate heresy. Yahya quietly hired scribes to copy a verse, changed 3 words, then slipped it to a palace singer. By sunset, the altered poem spread through perfumed halls, and Yahya's rival left court in chains. Thus Roman technique crossed language, religion, and desert, proving reputation warfare more portable than armies. Back in Italy, as Charlemagne forged his new empire, papal scribes compiled the donation of Constantine, a document granting the Pope vast temporal power. Later scholars proved it an 8th century forgery, but for 200 years its public readings toppled kings who challenged Rome's authority. A lie written in stately Latin wielded crowns like playthings, echoing the day Octavian had read Antony's will. Through medieval lanes and Renaissance courts, from Borgia poison books to Elizabethan libels nailed on London taverns, the pattern repeated: forge, reveal, destroy. Printing presses only amplified the reach. A pamphlet accusing a Habsburg archduke of incest could flood Paris in a week, outselling Salters. Reputations, once local, became continental targets. Yet the old lesson persisted. Rumor thrived where proof was scarce, literacy uneven, and spectacle beloved. The modern world offers swifter ink, newspapers, radio, glowing screens, but the Roman formula still holds. A leaked memo, a doctored image, a hashtagged phrase chanted by millions. Each is heir to Curio's forged letter, to Procopius's secret notebook, to a monk's lampoon on city gates. Look closely, and you will see Roman ghosts in every scandal cycle. A senator brandishing emails on live television, echoes Cicero unrolling Catiline's letters. An investigative podcast releasing hidden tapes plays the part of a Contillo speaker, igniting the forum. Even the phrase, cancel culture, mirrors the ancient verdict of damnatio memoriae, the legal erasure of a disgraced name from marble and scroll alike. So the next time you watch reputations collapse overnight, remember the stones of the forum, the flicker of wax tablets by torchlight, and a crowd leaning in as a single voice read lines that might be truth or trap. The empire fell, languages shifted, but the theater of scandal endures, its script penned long ago in Rome, and still revised, night after night, by hands hungry for power. 5 centuries after the last emperor left Rome, the ancient city was little more than a sleepy pilgrimage stop, its broken columns drowning in weeds. Yet the art of public ruin that Rome had perfected marched on, now wearing modern boots. What had been voiced from marble rostra was copied in guild halls, printed on cheap pamphlets, whispered in smoky cafes, and finally flashed across electric wires. The tools changed, the motive stayed the same. Destroy a rival by making the crowd believe the worst. Our story moves first to Paris in the closing years of the 19th century. The French army needed a scapegoat for leaks to Germany, and they found one in an obscure Jewish captain named Alfred Dreyfus. A single sheet of paper, the bordereau, was waved before a secret tribunal as proof of treason. Its handwriting barely matched Dreyfus' S, and experts disagreed, but generals knew the Roman trick. Words shown in public outweigh silent facts. Newspapers printed traitor in type so large that even street sweepers could read it from half a block away. Crowds spat at Dreyfus's wife. Children sang filthy songs about Jews and spies. Only years later did Colonel Pickford reveal another man's signature on the page, yet the damage had been done. Dreyfus's honor broke like a clay lamp. France itself split into warring camps. If Cicero had watched from Elysium, he might have nodded in grim recognition. Forge, accuse, repeat until the victim cracks. Across the Atlantic, a century later, the glow of television screens replaced Roman torches. In Washington, a nameless source called Deep Throat guided 2 reporters through a maze of files and phone logs. Much like Curio's forged scrolls, these papers showed that men in the White House had paid burglars to break into rivals' offices. It took 2 summers of late-night parking lot whispers, and typed pages slid under apartment doors. But at last, the President of the United States resigned. Viewers around the world watched the fall live. Proof that reputations could still collapse faster than empires. Even the digital age, with its endless servers, simply built taller stages for the old drama. An email thread, a doctored photo, a clipped recording. One tap of a finger spreads them to millions in a breath. Ancient Rome needed a herald's shout. 21st century Rome, reborn on the internet, needs only a share button. When a famous director's private messages leaked, his films vanished from theaters overnight. When a prime minister's expense receipts appeared on a website, his coalition disintegrated within a week. No swords drawn, no marching legions, just text, image, outrage. Yet history shows that rumor is not invincible. Sometimes truth speaks louder if patient hands present it well. Think of Nelson Mandela, branded a terrorist by forged South African police reports. Later, those same pages were unmasked line by line, and Mandela walked free to become a symbol of forgiveness. Think of the young American soldier falsely accused of war crimes, until hidden radio logs proved he never gave the fatal order. His name was cleared, though the stain lingered like smoke after a firestorm. What then have 2 millennia of reputational war taught? First, that any society which prizes honor will breed attackers who weaponize shame. Second, that crowds hunger for stories, the harsher the better. Third, that the methods travel. From wax tablets to broadsheets to data dumps, each new medium only widens the blast radius. Finally, that vigilance matters. A single quiet voice with the right evidence can still choke a lie, as Cyprian of Thapsus did before his council, as Colonel Pickford did in his Paris office. Modern citizens carry more power than any Roman mob. With a click, they can condemn or defend, build or break. The choice rests on each finger hovering over each screen. Will we repeat the forum's frenzy, stoning reputations for sport? Or will we ask, as skeptical onlookers seldom dared in Caesar's time, show me the seal, show me the ink, let me weigh the proof. The stones of the ancient forum are cracked and silent now, but they echo whenever an accusation goes viral. In that echo lives a warning. Words are lighter than swords, yet they cut deeper and travel farther. Empires topple, crowns rust, screens shatter. The rumor endures, a restless ghost born in Rome, still hungry, still whispering, forever testing whether we have learned to see through its thin, deadly veil. The night air over the forum smelled of olive oil lamps and rumor. Word spread faster than any torchlight, skipping from tavern to tavern, that the young Senator Publius Clodius Pulcher had slipped into a sacred, women-only rite disguised as a flute girl. In a city where gossip could topple careers, the scandal grew like summer wildfire. Older matrons gasped about the sacrilege, while street vendors laughed and mocked the Senate's prying morals. Yet beneath the comedy lay a lesson as sharp as a legionary spear. Reputation in Rome was currency, and nothing spent it faster than scandal. Clodius understood this better than most. He was bold, quick-tongued, and hungry for attention. After Julius Caesar's wife Pompeia hosted the festival of the Bona Dea, Clodius snuck in hoping, some said, to charm her. His disguise fooled no one for long. A slave recognized the stranger's voice, screams rang out, and Clodius escaped into the moonlight. The next morning, senators demanded a trial. Caesar, anxious to protect his own name, quietly divorced Pompeia, muttering the famous line that a leader's wife must be above suspicion. Modern ears may hear echoes of this tale in 21st century headlines. A celebrity slips through a hotel's back door. A politician's secret meeting is exposed by a smartphone lens. And suddenly, the court of public opinion erupts. The Roman crowd had no social media, yet they produced the same storm of whispers. Stone walls served as message boards, Clients repeated rumors in the morning salutation. Satirists carved jokes into wax tablets. Clodius, sensing opportunity, twisted the scandal into fuel. He claimed the charges were fabricated by rivals, painted himself as victim of senatorial elitism, and won sympathy from the urban poor. The trial ended in chaos. Jurors, bribed with heavy purses, voted to acquit. Clodius left the court grinning, pockets lighter but influence greater. For the rest of his life he brandished that acquittal as proof he could not be shamed. Like certain modern public figures who emerge from controversy more famous, Clodius thrived on outrage. He founded street gangs, disrupted elections, and bullied orators such as Cicero. Rome learned that spectacle could drown substance, that if noise was loud enough, truth bent under its weight. Another lesson arrived some years later with the fall of Sejanus, the powerful prefect of Emperor Tiberius. Sejanus mastered what we would now call spin. He flattered writers, paid informers, and controlled palace access. Letters praising him appeared in public archives. Poets received gifts to urge comparisons between Sejanus and Mars, the war god. Meanwhile, secret arrests thinned the ranks of rivals. The city's mood darkened as friends vanished overnight, yet official bulletins praised stability. This imbalance, bright propaganda masking silent fear, mirrors current worries when governments shape narratives through friendly media outlets. In Rome, the balance broke only when Tiberius, brooding on the island of Capri, read fresh rumors that Sejanus planned a coup. The emperor sent a letter to the Senate. At first, the message praised Sejanus in warm tones, keeping senators calm. Then, abruptly, Tiberius shifted, accusing his prefect of treason. Guards seized Sejanus on the spot. Crowds tore down his statues within hours. The whiplash stunned Rome. People realized how quickly official stories could flip. Today, when a leader praises an aide until headlines grow dangerous, and then casts that aide aside, we feel the same jolt. Sejanus's rise and fall teach that loyalty in politics often lasts only until the next convenient turning point, and that controlling the narrative works until it doesn't. We see another mirror in the life of Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus. Ancient writers whispered that she arranged convenient deaths with tasty figs brushed in poison. Whether true or not, the narrative stuck because it fit public fears. Livia cultivated an image of calm motherhood, standing beside Augustus like marble virtue. Yet rumors transformed her into a silent puppeteer. Modern observers know how quickly a rumor can brand a public figure regardless of proof. Once a story has emotional power, it spreads like wine at a feast. Even the humble tavern keeper played a role. One papyrus tax receipt lists a woman named Fausta, owner of a small Subura wine shop, fined for seditious talk. Scholars think she repeated gossip that Emperor Nero burned the city. Her penalty shows that Rome watched not only senators, but every voice. Today, when online comments spark lawsuits or job losses, we live Fausta's dilemma writ large. Speech is free until someone powerful chooses otherwise. At the heart of these episodes lies a constant: information is weaponry. Rome had scrolls instead of screens, but the method was alike. A rival whispered, a scribe copied, a herald shouted in the forum, and reputations shifted overnight. Cicero complained that public rumor rides on many tongues and no wall can halt it. Replace tongues with tweets, and the sentence feels written yesterday. So what warnings does Rome offer the modern world? First, scandal favors the prepared storyteller. Claudius survived because he seized his own narrative. Second, control through propaganda, like Sejanus's dream, is brittle. When collapse comes, it is swift. Third, rumors stick to pre-existing fears. Livia's alleged poison matched anxieties about hidden female power. Finally, every citizen, even a tavern keeper, sits beneath the gaze of authority when words become threats. As tonight's fire fades into embers, imagine the forum closing under the same starlight that now brushes our windows. The marble statues remain silent, yet their stories echo in our news feeds. In Rome, reputations rose and fell on whispers and spectacle. In our age, the tools have changed, but the human taste for intrigue endures. When the next headline roars, perhaps we will recall Claudius smirking in his borrowed dress. Sejanus dragged from glory, Livia's figs offered on a silver plate, and Fausta counting coins behind her bar. Each a witness that information, like wine, can nourish or poison, depending on whose cup it fills. The sun was barely above the Palatine when a hush fell over the Curia Julia. Senators in bright togas shifted uneasily as parchment rustled in the hands of Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect's cousin, who had gathered them for a reading of national importance. The scroll he held was rumored to contain the sealed confession of Marcus Agrippa Postumus, the exiled grandson of Augustus. Some claimed Postumus had plotted to poison the Emperor Tiberius from afar. Others whispered the confession was forged, inked overnight by palace scribes eager to clear a path for Sejanus's own allies. Yet the senators leaned forward, hungry for scandal. As the words rolled off Lucius's tongue, "And I, Postumus, vow eternal hatred toward the emperor," gasps echoed under the marble roof. A distant roar drifted in from the forum. Town criers had timed their proclamations to match the reading, unleashing the same carefully crafted story. By sundown, statues of Postumus were toppled, and his few supporters were in chains. Whether the confession was genuine no longer mattered. The narrative was set, and Rome marched to its drum. Modern watchers recognize the pattern. A leaked memo, an anonymous source, a document no journalist can verify, yet all are quoting. Such tools shape opinion before facts catch up. 2 millennia ago, Rome discovered that if you control the document, you control the day. Postumus's name became mud within hours, and no tribunal dared dig for truth. Not all propaganda needed parchment. Sometimes the stage itself did the work. When Gaius Caligula ordered a parade through the streets in golden armor, he rode a chariot pulled by snow-white horses and halted on the steps of the temple of Castor. There, before the dazzled crowd, he flung fistfuls of silver coins and declared himself son of Jupiter. Spectators scrambled to grab the shining discs, each stamped with his face. Later, tavern talk revolved not around taxes or law, but around the day a living god rained silver from the sky. Today, corporations launch marketing stunts, celebrities drop surprise albums, influencers stage viral giveaways. The technique is ancient. Overwhelm the senses, distract the mind, and plant an image that pushes policy aside. Caligula's real aim that day was simple: divert attention from a famine in the countryside and hide rising grain prices. His glittering parade bought him a month of silence while granaries remained empty. The coins cost less than a shipment of wheat, yet they fed the hunger for spectacle. Occasionally, spectacle turned to terror. Under Emperor Domitian, 3 Vestal virgins were accused of breaking their vow of chastity. Rumor said one had been seen exchanging secret letters with a senator who opposed Domitian's new tax on inheritances. In truth, no solid evidence reached the public, but the charge itself was poison enough. Domitian invited the populace to watch the trial in the Forum. Witnesses, coached by imperial agents, wept on cue about divine anger and earthquakes. The Vestals were buried alive, the senator executed, and Domitian's tax passed without further debate. Historians later judged the episode a political purge cloaked in moral panic. Modern parallels abound when public outrage, whether over finances, morality, or personal conduct, is weaponized to silence critics. Hashtags trend, reputations crumble, and legislation sails through while everyone stares at the scandal. Rome's genius was to fuse law, religion, and theater into one irresistible performance. Yet even the greatest performances met resistance. One winter afternoon, the historian Aulus Cremutius Cordus stood before a tribunal, accused of praising tyrannicides Brutus and Cassius in his books. The prosecution argued that honoring Caesar's assassins was treason. Cordus, stooped, gray-haired, voice steady, addressed the court. If writing history truthfully is treason, then we may as well burn the libraries. He knew his fate was sealed. Rather than await execution, he left the hall, returned home, and opened his veins in a warm bath. Friends rescued his scrolls and hid them in catacombs, preserving them for a wiser age. Fast forward to our century. Banned journalists archive articles on foreign servers, whistleblowers encrypt files, entire libraries fit on flash drives smaller than a denarius. Technology changed, the instinct did not. Cordus's stand reminds us that truth finds shelter when brave souls protect it, even as power seeks to erase inconvenient words. Money, too, carved secret paths through Roman politics. The collegia, trade guilds, hired lobbyists long before the word existed. In smoky tabernae near the Circus Maximus, guild leaders met with junior senators over cups of watered wine, slipping purses of sestertii into their cloaks. They promised votes against grain tariffs, favorable contracts for aqueduct repairs, or pardons for smuggling salt from the coast. Cicero, returning from one such tavern, complained to a friend, "The Senate is for sale, only the price is debated." Replace purses with wire transfers and taverns with private fundraisers, and the scene echoes every capital today. Romans even invented issue advertising. Mural painters were paid to scrawl slogans, "Vote for Lucius, friend of the bakers," on city walls. Fines existed, but enforcement was lax. After all, the same politicians wrote the rules. Despite all manipulation, the Roman crowd sometimes broke the script. During Emperor Claudius's rule, a rumor spread that a new aqueduct stones were dangerously thin, likely to burst and flood the Subura district. Panic turned to fury. Citizens marched to the Forum, pelting the work site with rubble. Claudius faced a rare dilemma: suppress the riot or appease it. He chose appeasement. Standing atop a temporary platform, he swore by his ancestors the aqueduct was safe, invited engineers to explain the design, and promised free grain for a week. The riot dissolved into cheers. The lesson: public outrage can force transparency if it threatens stability. Modern leaders likewise release internal reports, call press conferences, or open investigations when unrest grows loud enough. Claudius's speech became a template. Concede a little, placate the crowd, keep the machine running. Yet Rome also teaches that transparency without reform is fragile. Decades after Claudius, the same aqueduct cracked, flooding basements and causing costly repairs. Technical truth had bowed to political expedience, a warning that crowd-pleasing statements cannot replace solid policy. In all these tales, Postumus's forged confession, Caligula's silver reign, Domitian's moral purge, Quartus's banned history, clandestine guild payoffs, Claudius's crisis management, we glimpse timeless patterns. Information crafted for power, spectacle masking failure, morality leveraged as a weapon, truth hidden yet preserved, money flowing among lawmakers, and public pressure acting as both tool and test. When tomorrow's headlines flash across our screens, we might recall how Rome's marble stages once echoed with similar dramas. The technology changed from scroll to smartphone, but the choreography of scandal remains. And somewhere, perhaps, a modern Quartus saves a backup. A modern Claudius crafts a viral hashtag. A modern Domitian tests moral outrage. And a modern crowd decides whether to cheer, riot, or simply scroll on. In the cool dawn before the ovens of Rome had warmed their first loaves, a hush spread among the bakers of the Vicus Patricius. News traveled by lamplight. The Emperor Nero's stepbrother Britannicus lay dead, collapsed in mid-sip the previous night. Some swore they smelled bitter almonds in the cup. Others whispered that his lips turned black before the musicians could tune their flutes. Within hours, carts rattled down the narrow street carrying fresh posters that read, in hurried charcoal strokes, "Tribute to our beloved prince taken by the gods." But everyone in the quarter knew gods rarely prepared such swift poison. They suspected Agrippina, Nero's formidable mother, or perhaps Nero himself, eager to clear a rival. Official bulletins framed the death as an unfortunate fever. Court physicians signed statements, sealed with purple wax, announcing no foul play. Yet private chatter told another story. A powdered draft slipped into wine moments before the toast. For modern readers, the episode rings familiar. An unexpected demise of a public figure. An official cause released at speed, social media buzzing with toxicology theories, podcasts debating motives. Rome did not have hashtags, but graffiti served, scratched onto marble. Nero, wine taster of death. The city became a living forum of rumor, and no decree could erase those lines. Agrippina understood optics better than any senator. Anticipating backlash, she staged a lavish funeral for Britannicus, parading hired mourners wailing through the streets. Elegiac poems appeared overnight lauding his gentle nature. The strategy was straight from today's crisis management playbook. Flood the channels with emotion, shift focus toward grief and away from questions. Yet whispers persisted, because grief cannot wholly drown suspicion when power hunts its own blood. Shortly after, Agrippina herself fell from grace. Nero, anxious to rule unshackled, spread stories that his mother plotted to seat Britannicus's secret twin on the throne, a fiction worthy of modern conspiracy forums. He fed choice tidbits to gossip-hungry playwrights, who debuted satirical farces of scheming matriarchs on the stage of the theater of Pompey. Audiences roared at exaggerated Agrippina masks, hooked nose, sharp chin, never realizing they were actors in Nero's information war. In our age, reputational takedowns follow similar arcs. Leak a salacious rumor, let entertainment echo it, then use the public laughter as proof. Ancient Rome shows that satire is double-edged. It can speak truth to power, but it can also become power's sharpest blade. Years later, under Emperor Vespasian, another drama unfolded with eerie 21st century parallels. Titus, his charismatic son, endured a barrage of negative scrolls accusing him of secret deals with Queen Berenice of Judea. Romans feared a foreign queen might sway imperial policy. Rival senators seeded pamphlets depicting Berenice draped over Rome's eagle standards, whispering in Latin poorly accented. Vespasian's advisors urged Titus to ghost her publicly. The heir complied, sending Berenice home on a gilded galley while proclaiming undying respect, classic damage control. Rome exhaled. The gossip fog lifted, yet personal hearts broke in the name of optics. Today, public figures abandon relationships under press glare. Rome reminds us how old that choreography is. Image beats intimacy when the crowd's trust is the throne. But not every spin succeeded. Enter Gaius Calpurnius Piso, head of the most famous conspiracy of Nero's reign. Piso gathered poets, knights, even praetorian officers in suburban gardens to plot a coup. Instead of secrecy, he relied on curated leaks. Whispers that generals backed him, artists flocked to him, oracles predicted his success. The idea was to create unstoppable momentum, the ancient version of going viral. Yet an anxious accomplice informed Nero first. When arrests came, the court published letters describing Piso's treasonous banquet to justify executions. Scribes embellished. They claimed Piso toasted with British silver cups, played seditious songs on Greek lyres. The goal was to paint him un-Roman, decadent, foreign-hearted. A modern public relations strategy. Otherize the enemy. Still, some Romans remained sympathetic, noting that Nero's source may have forged parts of the evidence. The affair teaches that propaganda gains power when it aligns with existing fears, in this case, Rome's dread of luxury eroding virtue. Substitute foreign interference. insider trading or email servers, and the lesson holds. Even emperors were not immune to information blowback. After the Great Fire of 64, Nero blamed Christians, framing them as arsonists guided by sinister rites. He paraded them in the circus, wrapped in pitch-soaked tunics, setting them alight to illumine evening games. Yet the cruelty backfired. Philosophers like Seneca, though wary to speak openly, hinted that a ruler who needed living torches had lost moral fire. Word of the persecutions spread along trade routes. Distant provinces muttered that the emperor feared truth so much he burned its messengers. In modern terms, aggressive scapegoating can erode legitimacy faster than it rallies support. The Senate itself hosted lobbyists long before the term existed. Consider the publicani, tax-farming corporations whose shareholders formed equestrian clubs. When a new province was annexed, publicani bid for collection rights, then bribed censors to set low lease prices. They penned flattering histories painting their greed as entrepreneurial Roman vigor. Critics like the historian Tacitus exposed the ruse, noting villagers stripped of grain to meet quotas. Today's corporate white papers and think tank op-eds echo that self-polishing technique. Rome instructs us: follow the money in any narrative that smells too fragrant. Parallel lessons emerge from the career of Julia Domna, wife of Emperor Septimius Severus. A Syrian by birth, she sponsored philosophers, held salons, and hired scribes to distribute essays praising her wisdom. Political opponents sneered, dubbing her the Syrian schemer. She countered by funding public baths, where soap cakes bore her likeness and slogans of maternal care. Modern philanthropists buy goodwill via hospitals or museums. Julia bought it with warm water and perfumed oil. Her success shows that controlling narrative sometimes means delivering tangible benefit, not only spinning words. Yet the strongest Roman echo today may be the libelli famosi, anonymous slander boards. Wooden tablets affixed near busy crossroads invited passers-by to carve accusations. Lucius owes debts. Senator Flaccus cheats at dice. Midwife poisoned babies for hire. Some claims were true, many false, but all shaped reputations. Officials occasionally scrubbed the boards, yet fresh scratches appeared by dawn. Compare this to anonymous social accounts, message board rumors, or leaked documents whose origin we cannot trace. Rome's experience warns that anonymity plus amplification equals lasting stain. Legal redress lags far behind. So what concrete guidance can we harvest from these ancient intrigues? First, verify sources when scandal breaks. Rome suffered dearly from forged confessions and poisonous rumors. Second, be wary of scapegoats. Nero's fiery show bought months of calm but burned his legacy forever. Third, realize image management often demands personal sacrifice. Titus set aside love for political optics. Fourth, remember that public works can repair reputations where words fail. Julia Domna's baths outshone pamphlets. Fifth, anonymity accelerates slander. Combating it requires transparency, not just censorship. If we listen closely, the stones of the Via Sacra still murmur. Stories rule empires. They ruled then, they rule now. 5 emperors fell to rumors sharper than any dagger. 5 minutes of trending outrage today can do the same to a career, a company, or a cause. The medium has changed from wax tablet to wireless signal. But the human pulse that thrills at scandal is identical. Therefore, as modern citizens scrolling headlines, we carry both burden and power. Burden, because we can be misled as easily as a crowd watching Britannicus collapse. Power, because we can demand evidence, track financial trails, amplify cooler voices. Rome offers cautionary tales, but also hope. The historian Cordus's hidden scrolls survived, Tacitus's critiques endured, truth found readers long after tyrants turned to dust. Keeping that lineage alive is our charge. The late Republic was a stage where words cut deeper than swords, and few wielded them better than Gaius Octavian, the young heir of Julius Caesar. After Caesar's assassination, Rome fell into factions. Mark Antony, seasoned soldier and charismatic orator, controlled veteran legions and the eastern provinces. Octavian, barely 20, lacked armies but mastered another weapon: narrative. He hired poets, pamphleteers, and street criers to sculpt public opinion long before any ballot was cast. Their contest to guide Rome's future became a textbook in media warfare, one that modern strategists would recognize at a glance. Antony's marriage to the Egyptian queen Cleopatra proved easy ammunition. Octavian's allies plastered walls with cartoons. Antony reclining on a couch in silken robes, Cleopatra feeding him grapes, while Rome's eagle wept in chains. Meanwhile, Octavian read aloud what he claimed was Antony's will, acquired, some say, by bribing the Vestal virgins who kept senatorial records. The will bequeathed Roman lands to Cleopatra's children and requested burial in Alexandria. Whether authentic or doctored, its leak did the job. Senators gasped, crowds hissed, and Antony's stature shrank overnight. Swap parchment for leaked emails and graffiti for late-night talk shows, and the tactic is timeless. Make a rival appear foreign, unpatriotic, in bed with outside influence. Octavian framed himself the humble Italian guardian of tradition, while Antony became the decadent globalist. When war came, Octavian's fleet sailed under banners that read "Liberty of Rome." In truth, both men sought power. Narrative alone determined which ambition felt safer. Octavian's victory at Actium sealed more than a military win. It proved that controlling storylines could conquer continents. Antony's smear campaign endured, but another tool in Rome's arsenal was legislative morality. Enter the Lex Scantinia, an old but seldom enforced statute prohibiting certain sexual acts. Politicians dusted it off whenever they needed leverage. In 44 BC, tribunes filed charges under Scantinia against Marcus Caelius Rufus, a gifted speaker aligned with Caesar's faction. The accusation: illicit relations with freeborn youths. Cicero defended Caelius, turning the trial into theater. He mocked the prosecution's inconsistencies, cracked jokes about moral guardians who paid dancers by night, and won acquittal. Yet the stain lingered. Rivals still whispered Scantinia whenever Caelius addressed the forum. Modern parallels leap out. old laws once ignored suddenly revived to hobble adversaries. Headlines trumpet private missteps louder than policy failures. In Rome, as now, moral outrage sold papers or wax tablets. The Scantinia trials warn us that statute books can hide time bombs. Dust them off selectively, and justice warps into vendetta. While Octavian molded propaganda and morality, politics at street level revolved around ambitus, electoral bribery. Candidates handed out olives, staged gladiator shows, even paid barber fees for voters. One hopeful, Marcus Junius Silanus, distributed thousands of small coins stamped with his profile and a smiling dolphin. He won, then faced prosecution for ambitus. His defense argued that coins were campaign tokens, not bribes. The jury, stocked with his supporters, agreed. The fine was minor, the precedent vast. Roman elections became spending contests, and laws against ambitus multiplied yet seldom bit. Replace coin dolphins with lavish fundraisers, and the echo is clear. Money talks, regulators chase, outcomes rarely change. Centuries later, Emperor Commodus refined self-branding into spectacle. Born Lucius Aurelius Commodus, he reminted coins showing himself in lion skin like Hercules, commissioned statues of his face atop godlike bodies, and took to the Colosseum arena wielding a wooden sword tipped in gold. Courtiers applauded each staged victory. Scribes recorded astronomical winnings. He graciously donated to the treasury money, of course, first gifted to him by fearful senators. Commodus's approval briefly soared among the plebs, who loved free games and bread. But when pantry shelves emptied and rumors spread that the emperor charged Rome 1,000,000 sesterces per arena appearance, admiration curdled into spite. A wrestling partner smothered Commodus in his bath after senators bribed the palace guard. The moral, performative populism dissolves once reality pinches. Leaders today may dance on talk shows, post workout videos, or flash charity checks on social media. Yet if living costs rise while wages stall, no carousel of optics holds. Commodus shows that spectacles build loyalty only as long as bread keeps pace with circus. To understand how narratives hardened into policy, consider Emperor Tiberius's clampdown on Lex Maestatis, laws against treasonous speech. At first designed to punish plots, Tiberius's jurists expanded treason to include satirical remarks, careless jokes, even dreams interpreted as omens. A man named Apuleius dreamed Tiberius was dethroned. A friend reported him, and the Senate condemned Apuleius to death. Such prosecutions cultivated a culture of preemptive silence, reminiscent of today's chilling effects, when defamation suits or anti-whistleblower laws threaten critics into hush. Still, resilience flickered. Satirist Juvenal, writing decades later, filled his verses with disguised barbs. Emperors became bald Neros, corrupt officials, the stench of alley fish. Readers decoded references in private, passing scrolls hand to hand. The clandestine humor network foreshadows modern meme culture, subtexts that slip past censors yet unify dissent. Even when power muzzles open critique, wit finds a crack. The last Roman case ties lobbying, morality, and narrative into one knot. the grain-dole reforms of Aurelian. By the 3rd century's chaos, food shortages brewed rage. Usurers hoarded wheat, hoping prices would skyrocket. Aurelian, soldier emperor with populist streak, vowed double rations at half cost. Senators owning granaries panicked. They sponsored pamphlets warning that cheap grain would weaken national character, echoing arguments against welfare in later ages. Aurelian countered with public ledgers showing profiteer margins. He marched through Subura, personally supervising the dole queue. His transparency disarmed elites, reforms passed, hunger dipped, and pamphleteers lost credibility. Sometimes Rome teaches. Facts plainly displayed can break propaganda's spell. Strip away togas, and our world still wrestles with these patterns, leak and frame. Octavian showed that selective disclosure shapes destiny. Morality as sword, the Lex Scantinia, reminds that old laws weaponize quickly. Money votes. Ambitus warns campaign finance still skews fairness. Spectacle governance. Commodus proves photo ops perish when wallets thin. Speech control. Tiberius's treason laws echo modern gag orders. Data over talk. Aurelian's ledgers show transparency can outshine rhetoric. We inherit both their vices and lessons. Each headline of today feels less novel knowing a scribbler in a Roman alley once etched the same scandal on plaster. Perhaps recognizing these cycles pushes us to demand stronger safeguards, verified leaks, balanced reporting, election finance limits, open budgets, lest we lapse into an eternal coliseum of intrigue and distraction. Night settles over the 7 hills, and a soft wind sweeps through the ruins of temples where marble columns still tell stories. In that hush, the ghosts of Rome whisper one last set of lessons. For ours is a world that often forgets what the ancients already learned at great cost. It begins with the winter of 63 BC, when Lucius Sergius Catiline, stood before the Senate and swore that he had no plans to burn the city or cancel all debts. Cicero, the consul, rose with rolled scrolls in both hands. One scroll held letters from frightened informers, the other, a speech he had drafted long before dawn. Cicero thundered that Catiline had already packed his silver plate and fled to an outlaw camp north of Rome. He recited every rumor as fact, painting Catiline as an arsonist, assassin, and puppet master of bankrupt youths. Senators gasped. Catiline stormed out into the street, doomed by rhetoric more than evidence. Modern readers feel the echo whenever politics turns on leaked emails, dubious chat logs, or intercepted audio. Cicero leveraged partial truths to drive an enemy beyond the pale, and the city applauded because the story felt right. Weeks later, captured conspirators were strangled in a basement prison on Cicero's order. Only afterward did some senators question the legality of sudden executions without trial. Cicero shrugged. Public safety, he argued, outweighed procedure. 2 millennia on, emergency decrees and national security claims still test the line between caution and overreach. Rome warns. Panic helps power skip steps. Fast forward to the reign of Emperor Caracalla, 2 centuries later. Caracalla needed fresh tax revenue to pay his soldiers. He issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly every free inhabitant of the empire. Propagandists hailed it as an act of generosity, the emperor making millions of provincials full Romans overnight. Yet hidden in the fine print was a new inheritance levy that applied only to citizens. Revenue soared. Provincial elites celebrated the honor, unaware it came with a bill. Substitute modern tax reforms labeled as relief, but bundled with complex clauses, and the maneuver feels current. Caracalla's edict teaches that messaging can mask fiscal motive, turning a grab for cash into an anthem of inclusion. During Caracalla's tour, court historians like Cassius Dio noted another tactic familiar today: selective access. Only writers who praised the emperor's victories received permission to follow the imperial retinue. Critical voices were stuck in distant libraries, denied the anecdotes that gave work sparkle. Friendly biographers, meanwhile, enjoyed banquets and first-hand stories. The result: official chronicles bursting with heroism, while skeptical versions faded. Journalists in our era recognized the pattern: press pools, embargoed briefings, credentials revoked. Rome reminds us that controlling seats in the room often shapes the report. But information control was never perfect. In AD 364, Emperor Valentinian commissioned a census. Local magistrates inflated figures to prove diligence, fearing imperial wrath if numbers looked small. Grain allocations were set by these tallies. Soon warehouses burst in some towns, while others starved. Merchants wrote petitions, smuggling them across mountains to reach the capital. When petitions vanished in bureaucratic mazes, traders carved pleas on roadside milestones where pilgrims could read. The grassroots campaign forced governors to revise counts. Social media did not exist, yet public walls and travelers created slow but steady feedback loops. The story teaches that decentralized voices, even on stone, can correct official error when channeled through networks of ordinary people. Consider now the Severan Empress Julia Misa, grandmother to Elagabalus. After Caracalla's death, she faced a risky task: put her teenage grandson on the throne. She spread whispers in soldiers' camps that the boy was Caracalla's secret son, born of a nighttime affair. Misa bribed astrologers to predict a sun-priest emperor. She paraded Elagabalus in shining robes, promising higher pay. The legions, dazzled by spectacle and salary, hailed him Augustus. Months later, Rome discovered the story was fiction, but legions already controlled the gates. Modern parallels appear when powerful families engineer narratives to install heirs in boardrooms, parliaments, or entertainment franchises. Using star-making machines and influencer payoffs before scrutiny can catch up. Even in late antiquity, as Christianity rose, propaganda shifted but persisted. Bishop Ambrose of Milan faced a wealthy senator, Symmachus, who pled for the restoration of the altar of victory in the Senate House. Ambrose wrote open letters warning that pagan statues invited divine wrath, droughts, plagues, barbarian raids. He urged Christian crowds to lobby the emperor, staging processions with hymns and banners. Symmachus penned elegant rebuttals about tolerance and tradition, yet Ambrose owned the louder choir. The altar stayed down. Today, culture war campaigns mobilize congregations, fan groups, or online communities to flood inboxes of officials. Rome shows that whichever side energizes its base and frames calamity in moral terms often wins the statue fight. By the empire's twilight, the bureaucracy weaponized red tape itself. A provincial needed 36 seals to appeal a land dispute. Each clerk requested a gift of coins. One farmer near Antioch spent years traveling office to office until his money waned and crop failed. In frustration, he posed as a holy man, performing faux miracles to draw crowds and donations. Officials arrested him for fraud, but not before he narrated every bribe to eager listeners. Praetorian prefects scrambled, firing minor clerks to calm unrest. Whistleblowing through theater predates our whistleblowing through viral videos. Both rely on spectacle to shame systems into action. Across these centuries of intrigue, a single refrain recurs. Stories decide fates before swords strike. Octavian's smear, Catiline's downfall, Caracalla's tax masquerading as kindness, Julia Misa's manufactured lineage, Ambrose's moral panic, all prove that the pen, the rumor, the staged procession often set the battlefield long before troops march. 6 closing cautions from Rome to us. 1. Check the scroll before you cheer. A leaked document may be genuine, half-true, or forged like Antony's alleged will. Slow verification prevents fast injustice. 2. Beware revival of dusty statutes. Laws long dormant can awaken as partisan weapons, just as Lex Scantinia did. 3. Follow the money behind every generous gesture. Caracalla's worldwide citizenship carried a hidden invoice. Modern giveaways may too. 4. Know that access shapes narrative. Journalists granted the best seats might also inherit silent strings. 5. Crowds can course correct, but only when decentralized voices find a channel. Milestone graffiti, underground pamphlets, or independent platforms keep power honest. 6. Spectacle fades when bread runs out. Commodus's shiny games, Julia Misa's sun priest parades, all crumble if material conditions sour. Substance ultimately breaks spellcraft. Imagine closing your laptop tonight and hearing, faintly, Cicero's quill scratching, Ambrose's choir rising, Octavian's propagandists brushing ink onto fresh broadsheets. They remind you that every trending story, every sensational leak, every moral crusade stands on ancient shoulders. Technology accelerates, yet motives remain carved in the same human clay. Fear, ambition, devotion, greed. Armed with Rome's cautionary tales, perhaps we scroll with wiser eyes, ask who benefits, search for stone-solid sources amid digital dust, and if we must craft our own narratives about policy, business, or personal reputation, let us recall how swiftly rumor can backfire, how easily crowds turn, and how long truth endures after statues fall. That endurance, more than any emperor's decree, is the final Roman gift. A compass pointing past the noise toward the steady ground of evidence, accountability, and memory.